All right, it is noontime. Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have you. My name is Laura. I'm a law practice advisor at LCL, and thank you for joining us in this month's webinar for busy lawyers. For those of you that may be new, this is one of the services that LCL does for lawyers and law students around the state, as we try to give practical tips in a short amount of time. We know that you are all busy, and the things that will really help you improve your practice. Today, we are so delighted to have my colleague, Dr. Tracy Myers, as our guest expert. Dr. Tracy is going to be speaking on managing difficult emotions, and we know how important it is to regulate because as we've been learning more and more, mental health really impacts not only you as a person, but your productivity and everything about you. So we are really delighted to have her with us. To do a little bit of background about Dr. Myers, she has 24 years of experience in the fields of clinical psychology and integrative medicine, and this is very exciting. She is an author of a book that recently came out. The book is called Yin Yoga Therapy and Mental Health, and she's also contributed several book chapters on yoga, addiction, and psychotherapy. Her research focuses on mindfulness and yoga for mental health and traumatic brain injury. I want to note too that in addition to being one of our clinicians at LCL, Dr. Tracy also leads yoga for busy lawyers. So if you haven't done that, it is a fantastic program. I encourage you all to sign up. You can find out more about it on our website, lclma.org. And you can also see her when she does mindfulness trainings, which come at different points throughout the year. We will have some time for questions at the end, so please submit your questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. In the meantime, thank you all for being with us. And Dr. Tracy, again, wonderful to have you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm so happy to be here. And, this topic is something that I feel is really important for all of us, lawyers, legal professionals, and just citizens in the world that, we are encountering so much stress. And often we find our emotions bubbling up to the surface and we can get overwhelmed by them. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've all been experiencing, and then some practices, some really short practices that we can experiment with together around how to regulate, or I might even say self-regulate, right? How to regulate our own emotions. And then, of course, save some time for questions that may come up as you hear the material I'm going to present. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and talk today. So we're going to talk primarily about anxiety, but we also could substitute anxiety with depression, with trauma. We could substitute any difficult or painful emotion, but anxiety is one that I think most of us can relate to. And then how our anxiety influences our behavior and how that influence can have a negative effect on how we feel about ourselves, how we interact with other people in the workplace. So then we'll move into some strategies to reduce the impact of these difficult emotions. And then finally, we're going to talk about what is emotion regulation and what are some tools to help us stay more in the flow of life. As Laura mentioned, I do a lot of work with mindfulness and yoga and mind-body practices, because I really believe that's one of the ways we can effectively regulate our emotions, in addition to some of the other strategies I'm going to be talking about today. All right, so as Laura mentioned, we both work as colleagues at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, and as a clinician there, I'm working with legal professionals that are coping with sometimes anxiety or other mental health challenges, addiction issues, and this overriding stress level that all of us have been struggling with comes up in everybody I work with. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety. So anxiety is the #1 mental health issue across the world. About 275 million people, or 4% of the global population. And in the US, this holds up even before the pandemic, but it's increased significantly during the pandemic. It's the most prevalent psychiatric disorder in the US. And one other thing to say, since the pandemic, so the numbers in the US were something like 1 in 4 people at some point in their lives experience what we'd say clinically significant anxiety. And that means anxiety that impacts our daily life in some way, makes it hard to function, right? During the pandemic, research has shown that people are now more like 1 in 2. So about 50% of us, nearly half of us, have experienced clinically significant levels of anxiety. So it's a major worldwide challenge. And any of you that have experienced anxiety know it can be very, very uncomfortable. So what is an anxiety disorder? And I use the word disorder only in that that's how it's cited in the research, and that's how the field of psychology and psychiatry characterize a symptom or symptoms that actually impact life to a significant degree. And anxiety, but I do also want to say anxiety is normal too, right? But the disorder simply means that it's getting into how much it impacts our daily life. So anxiety disorders involve excessive fears, worries, or anxiety, and it can impact daily life in many ways, including high tension in the body. And that's why we're going to talk about some mind-body practices, avoidance behavior, which means, and I'm sure many of you can relate to it, if I avoid doing something, I momentarily feel better. But if I keep avoiding it, I actually make it worse. And many lawyers that I see struggle with this. They may not want to make a difficult phone call or have a difficult conversation because it's so anxiety provoking. But then the longer they don't do that, that actually creates more anxiety. It becomes a cycle. And some people that experience anxiety also have panic attacks, which is that physical manifestation of extreme stress in the body. Avoidance behavior can be particularly sticky for legal professionals. It can get lawyers in trouble ethically if you're avoiding filing or avoiding timeliness or avoiding difficult conversations, but also with our relationships, right? If we're avoiding certain aspects of a relationship, then we also can find a few months or years down the line, we're having communication issues. So anxiety can affect us in lots of different ways. So 2 main components of anxiety that I want to talk about today, because this also is our doorway into how to work with anxiety, right? As an emotion regulation practice. So number 1, there's this physical component, tension, headaches, shortness of breath, and probably all of you can think of some other ones that you experience in your body when you're anxious. I know for me, I might get sweaty palms, or I'm restless. I have trouble sitting still. Emotionally, the second part of anxiety, we often experience symptoms like nervousness, worrying, fear, and sometimes even an extreme feeling like in a panic attack. Sometimes people feel like they may die, like the heart is racing. It could be difficult to breathe. And that goes back into the physical, right? So we've got these physical symptoms, and then we have the emotional symptoms that go with it. And both of these, sometimes one more than the other, sometimes in combination, really affect how we think, how we learn, our ability to pay attention. How difficult is it to actually pay attention when we're really anxious, right? When we're really anxious, we're distracted. We're just trying to survive. Our body's going into maybe a fight or flight. So let's talk about how we would manage anxiety. And again, the idea of anxiety in this topic is that you could substitute it for something else. So maybe if you have a different emotion that's difficult to regulate, we can use these same principles for that emotion as well. So there are 3 main resources that I want to talk about today. One is Somatic Resources, which refers to our body's capacity to regulate our nervous system. Somatic, soma, body. Then emotion regulation, which we're going to talk about some specific cognitive strategies. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, compassion practices. How can we be kind to ourselves? So often we beat ourselves up for having the difficult emotion, and that actually creates even more distress for the system. So sometimes with clients, I start with the compassion practices first. Can we bring kindness, awareness, and non-judgmental space and healing for ourselves? And then we are often more able to do some of the somatic and emotion regulation tools. So these are not in particular order, but you can use any of them at any particular time. So let's talk first about somatic resources. Janina Fisher, who is a colleague of mine, she talks about how mindfulness-based techniques, like breathing, for example, or like a body scan, or like yoga, that's a mindfulness technique, can calm the body. So that's the physical somatic resource, and it can activate the frontal lobes. So what does that mean? Essentially, our frontal lobes help us to take time, be patient, plan, organize, perspective take, delay gratification. So when our frontal lobes are online, we can make better decisions. We are more capable in work situations to handle stress. And that helps us to change our behavior. So if we're less impulsive, for example, and we're calmer when there's a conflict happening, our behavior is going to probably be more appropriate for the situation, right? We're less likely to fire off a hostile email or avoid a conflict. We're going to have more capability to know what to do, trusting our own resources. So mindfulness helps us. It gets us back to that frontal lobe optimal level of functioning. And we want our frontal lobes to be working well so we can make good decisions. So mindfulness, most of you are familiar with the term mindfulness, but I just wanted to share this definition, which I really like, which is paying attention in a particular way on purpose. So we're doing that with this intentional focusing in the present moment and non-judgmentally. That's John Kabat-Zinn, who is sort of the grandfather or the father of mindfulness. He created the Mindfulness-Based stress reduction program, which I teach from. So mindfulness can help us pay attention and also stay in the present moment. And then Stahl and Goldstein add in that it helps us in a way to cultivate this mind-body connection, because we're paying attention not just to what's happening in the mind, but also in the body, what's happening right now. That's the beginning of that somatic resourcing. So mindfulness-based techniques for resourcing. Number one, we want to think about when we're anxious or gripped with a negative or difficult emotion. We often don't feel safe in our body. We may feel like we're in a fight or flight. You might even imagine maybe a recent situation you had where you were anxious. And as soon as I do that, I can imagine, I can feel it. My hands start to get just a little bit clammy, right? We can feel the body going into some kind of arousal. When we do our grounding and stabilization techniques, that helps our body to regulate. When our body's regulated, we're less likely to go into more extreme distress. So somatic resources can be used when we're in a distressed state, right? And that includes the breath, the body, and even awareness of our surroundings. So I'm going to give you, this is my go-to, and I'm going to give you, this is a very, very short somatic resource. And then I'm going to show you a few more. We won't have time to do all of them, but just so you have a flavor of it. So I'm just going to ask you to think about a situation where you felt anxious. Maybe you are already feeling it right now. Okay. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes or maybe just looking away from the screen for a moment, notice in your body how that anxiety is showing up. Maybe noticing where you feel the anxiety, the stress, the worry. And then I'm going to invite you to press down into your left foot. So pressing into the left foot and just activating the whole left leg from the toes all the way up to your glutes. And then release. And now press into the right foot, really activating the whole right leg from the toes to the right glute. And then release. And then take a conscious breath, breathing in through the nose. And gently breathing out with a gentle sigh. Let's do that one more time, breathing in. And breathing out. So you can open your eyes when you're ready. And for many of us, that simple practice can help us go from a heightened state of arousal 2, more relaxed, more grounded, more ready. Our frontal lobes are sort of back online, back on track. And even if you have to do this several times a day, each time you do that, you're using a somatic resource to regulate your emotions. All right, so what are some other examples? So you can also create a worry box. This is one I like to do, where we can imagine all your worries, and then you can imagine a box where you're placing the worries in. Some people even like to write down their worries, and then allowing the lid to go on it, and imagine putting those in for now. So while I'm going to do my work, I'm going to put my worries into this container. It's safe for me to come and retrieve if I need it. But it is giving ourselves this break from our worried thoughts. A couple of other ones. These are all somatic. You can see how we're using our body's resources. This refers to, again, imagining energetically putting your worries into your hands and allowing yourself to feel them, and then allowing yourself to release them. So we're physically and cognitively making space. We're not trying to push away what we're feeling. We're making space for it, and then we're releasing it. These are temporary. These are not permanent, but it gives us enough space so that we can focus on our job, focus on our work, and let our nervous systems have a break. The more that we are regulated in our nervous system, the better we feel, right? So our anxiety level will eventually come down if we're doing these on a regular basis. This is one that I like to use, especially if I'm starting to feel symptoms of panic. And I've worked with clients, when I have a client that might come into a session, sometimes they're really, really upset, activated, and maybe even having like a full panic attack. And this is one really helpful when you're starting to recognize those signs that you might be having a panic attack, or you're just really gripped with distress. So we're using the senses here. So we start with our sense of vision, right? We start by looking around the room and seeing 5 things that you can see. And then you can use the tactile sense, and look at 4 things that you might feel in your awareness. Sometimes it's even like your shirt, your skin, your desk, any surfaces. 3 things that you hear, so you can close your eyes and use the sense doorway of your hearing. And then smell and taste. So these 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 are ways that we can come into the present moment using the senses and help our body and our minds to come back to the present moment. When we're gripped with anxiety, it's hard to be present. We don't have that capacity to perspective take, to relax, to find ease. Sometimes we need tools to help us to get there. So I like this one a lot for kind of a quick way to regain our equilibrium when we're really feeling panicked. All right, so that's the somatic resources part. I want to now move into the term and some of the practices you can do around emotion regulation. So what is this term? It's a very hot term right now, emotion regulation. It comes from a form of psychotherapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, which is called DBT. And this type of psychotherapy has been around for a while, since the 1990s. It's a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's one of the first therapies that actually incorporated mindfulness into it. So this was revolutionary in psychology. Psychologists before DBT typically didn't include mindfulness. I mean, that wasn't even a typical way that we would practice psychotherapy. But Marsha Linehan, who created this model, was a practicing Buddhist herself, and she also had a lot of emotion regulation challenges. Her story is really amazing. She actually was in an inpatient hospital herself and taught herself meditation and learned how to resource herself. So emotion regulation comes from this model, and it addresses challenging or difficult emotions. It's one of the core areas of DBT, in addition to interpersonal skills, mindfulness, and something called distress tolerance, how to work with distressing feelings. Emotion regulation and distress tolerance both go hand in hand, as does mindfulness. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple of DBT practices because I think they're really helpful. DBT, this model, has lots of acronyms, so it's kind of fun. So they talk about the ABCs. So if we're looking at ways that we can strengthen our emotion regulation, we can accumulate positives. So what are things each day you can do to help you stay in a positive mindset? It seems so basic, but yet think about a day you might have that's a really stressful day. It's hard to even think about positive things. And maybe you didn't even have an opportunity to explore that. So imagine you created a list for yourself, a go-to list. You could just every day pick 1, 2, or 3 things that you might enjoy doing. And that just becomes part of your day. It's accumulating these positives, which helps to keep the anxiety level and the emotion regulation skills in the forefront. B is build mastery. And this goes with something called going with the flow. When we're building mastery on something, it feels good. It actually helps our whole nervous system to relax. It challenges our frontal lobes. It keeps our frontal lobes operating so that we can function well. So during the pandemic, I got into puzzles, and I'm not particularly good at puzzles, but I love the practice of doing it. It gets me out of my head. And there's something very satisfying about doing it, finding a piece. Sometimes I'll give myself, all right, 3 pieces, and then I'll go back to work. But many of us can find that building mastery is another way to regulate our emotions. And the C, cope ahead. When we know something is stressful, we know we're going to have a difficult challenge, we can begin to use some positive coping skills, something like this, and this is one that I often use. It also has a self-compassion piece to it too. It's like placing your hand on your heart and saying, I am safe. I'm doing the best I can. This is difficult, So we're just like befriending ourselves. We're giving ourselves space to know this could be a challenge, right? And we also are giving ourselves care and soothing. So ABCs. And here's another DBT skill that I like called please. And these are, in a way, like proactive. Like we can do these as just regular good practices before we are really anxious, right? So physical. One of the ways that we can just treat ourselves kindly is taking time in a shower to feel the hot water, right? The illness, I have many clients that come in, and I just was working with someone recently who said, I'm having terrible migraines. And I asked her, have you been to your doctor? She said, well, no, not in a while. My doctor gave me something, but I didn't really like the medication, so I just suffer. And when she has stress, she has migraines, and then the migraines make her feel worse. So we talked about just the very simple, let's go back to the doctor. Let's talk about, there's lots of different headache medications. So sometimes the simple act of setting up the appointment and just taking good care of yourself is really important, because it can set up the system to function so much better. We know the rest of these, but I still want to say them anyway, because we often don't think about them relating to emotion regulation. Eating, right? Like our balanced meals. If we have low blood sugar, we're going to be more likely to feel anxious or angry or hangry, right? Avoid. Now, avoid can be a good thing if we're avoiding things that don't serve us. But we want to avoid avoiding responsibility, which is that part of anxiety. So we want to avoid what's not working for us. So overworking, we want to maybe avoid overworking. And of course, we know so much about sleep and exercise. So these are like the proactive. So if you can imagine, we've got proactive strategies, which are these please strategies. And then the reactive strategies, what to do when we're gripped. That's when we're going more into those body-based emotion regulation tools that we just went through. So I want to do this final part about self-compassion, which, as I said in the beginning, can be the platform, the beginning of emotion regulation, or it could be a way that we can practice when we're gripped with painful emotions. 3 parts of self-compassion. One is kindness, saying kind things to ourselves, being kind to ourselves, which can relate to some of the please skills in emotion regulation. Mindfulness, bringing mindfulness to our current situation. If we avoid or don't know what we're feeling, there's no way to work with it. So I love this idea of mindfulness giving us this little appointment with ourselves. It gives us this opportunity to check in. How am I feeling in my body? how am I feeling in my emotions? What kind of thoughts am I having? So that allows us to actually know what's here right now. And then finally, the sense of connection, knowing we're not alone. That's why I always start my presentations with data that looks a little grim, but like how many of us are struggling. So 50% of us, millions and millions of people are struggling with emotion regulation and anxiety. We are not alone. And in fact, the more that we can support each other, by practicing in community, by recommending a friend to come to psychotherapy if they're needing help, by doing a webinar and saying, okay, I'm going to practice one of these with my child at night. We get to recognize we're not alone, and that is so relaxing to the nervous system. I was talking to my kids. My kids tend to run anxious. I've got a 21-year-old, 18-year-old, and 14-year-old, and we were talking about anxiety and how anxiety shows up differently for each of us. And we just talked about it, like this open conversation, and it was really, I think, calming to everyone to recognize, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, this doesn't mean there's something wrong with me, right? So that's the part of self-compassion that's really important to recognize. That it is a common challenge to feel painful or difficult emotions, and we often don't know what to do unless we get help or support. So self-compassion, when we're kinder to ourselves, we have more confidence, more satisfaction, and our bodies function better. Our immunity system functions better. So to create a self-compassion practice, first we start with the mindfulness part. The second is we start to notice the dialogue. For so many of us, we tend to be really hard on ourselves. Like, yeah, there's something wrong with me. I'm not a good fill in the blank or good enough. And we can start to move away from the judgment and more to the facts of like, I'm struggling. This is difficult. These emotions are painful. Recognizing you're not alone. Sometimes speaking the truth when a situation actually is harming you. And then finding balance through self-care, which is, I think, the gold standard. We all want to find that balance, but we can just start where we are. So we can do practices like a self-compassion break. And you can see on this slide that what we can do in this moment is just coming back to the present moment, noticing it, giving ourselves an expression of kindness, like this is difficult, this is hard. We might resource with our hands on our hearts or do our 2 feet, 1 breath. And then giving yourself a moment of care. If I move my body right now, that might feel better. If I pet my dog, if I go do my puzzle for a few minutes, right? These are all ways that we can meet our challenges. And finally, I just want to briefly talk about how when we're able to work on our emotion regulation skills, it helps us interpersonally. So there's a whole field called interpersonal mindfulness, which is that we can interact with people in the same way that we can do with our own personal mindfulness practice, with non-reactive presence and this quality of non-judgmental awareness. And so we can think about how we speak to people, right? How we communicate, the timing. Is the other person in their activated state? Like if someone's really activated, it's not a good time probably to bring up something challenging, right? So we want to really know when and how we want to provide feedback. We really want to be as best we can in our own truth. And that can be very generous when we're really being honest and truthful. Being gentle, we often think that if we are very firm, we raise our voice, some people will listen to us, but often the communication, especially if we're being mindful, can be more facilitated if we're staying in a relaxed, open place, because we co-regulate with each other. So if I'm more relaxed and I'm giving feedback in a gentle, relaxed way, the person receiving it is more likely to benefit. So by my own emotion regulation skills, I in turn am influencing the person I'm with. And you can try that. You can practice that. I do that a lot with my kids, right? If I keep my voice calm, gentle, I have an easy expression on my face, they are much less likely to respond negatively. I've practiced this for 21 years. But it really does help when we're able to keep our own window of tolerance, our own ability to stay within our regulated range when we're working with somebody else. And also, of course, how do we say things that are beneficial and harmonious rather than, causing conflict or trying to create divisive language or speech. So I know we've got lots of other things in these slides that will be available, but where to begin? So we want to increase our mind-body activities, just even a couple of those short practices, stepping away when we're getting over activated. We want to move away from the worldly things that get us even more activated. So I've been trying, my own personal goal is to have one night a week. I'm just starting with one night a week where I keep my phone out of the room. There's something energetically about what I'm looking at right before bed. And so this idea of moving away, even if it's one night a week, 1 hour a day, from other things that activate the nervous system. And then this practicing of kindness towards self and others. These are ways that we can begin to regulate our emotions, not just in the moment, but on an even more long-term basis. I think about emotion regulation as almost like climate control, right? We want to influence the overall climate, not just the weather system that's coming and going. The weather's like our emotions, right? We've got emotions coming and going, but the climate, we want to influence that through our practices. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here and see if there are any questions or comments. I know we're right at about 30 minutes into this webinar. I'm happy to answer any.
Tracy, I don't see any questions yet. I think we have all been mesmerized by your soothing recitation of all of these resources.
Oh, I see a couple of raised hands, Laura. Let's see. Oh,
Wonderful.
yes.
Go to that then.
Yeah. So let's see. Barb, do I see your? Okay. Yes. I see Barbara's hand. Barbara, do you want to speak? That would be great. That would be great. Yes. Hey.
Hi. The chat is disabled, which is probably why you're not getting any questions.
Okay. Thanks for
but my question is, so I took like an MBSR course at the beginning of COVID. It's been super helpful. But I have difficulty like when other people are in a heightened anxiety or really stressed. Like it's hard to keep my own center when like, whether it's like your child, your spouse, a coworker. I swear I feel like as I've gotten more done better with myself, it's like you attract them, like they come to you more, like help me. And it's just how do you handle that and not get pulled into their stress is my question.
That's such a great question. And I learned this skill at a mindfulness training, actually. It's something called the 60-40 rule. And I use it a lot, especially when you're working with people that are like in distress. So typically when someone's in distress and they come to you, we get pulled, like you're saying, Barbara, like 100%. And we like leave ourselves, like we're not even noticing what's happening in our own bodies. This idea is, can we, in any interaction, whether it's difficult or not, do a little check-in of how am I feeling in my body? So we always start with our somatic resourcing. Feel my breath. So I start with my breathing, feel my breathing, feel my breath, feel my feet on the floor. If that person's starting to get really activated, continuing to do 60% internal focus and 40% toward what they're saying. That doesn't mean you're not listening, but it means that you're tuning into what's happening in your inside of you, which actually makes you more effective with them. So it's a trick in a way of reorienting from that 100% totally captivated by what they're saying to come back to yourself. And you have to remind yourself of that, but it can be really helpful to remember that 60-40 rule. And you can try it with like a non-stressful person and see like, okay, I'm listening, but I'm also noticing, oh, I feel nice and relaxed and open in my chest or heart, gives you a lot of good data about your own emotion regulation. And then the bonus is that if you're calmer, that person's going to co-regulate with you because they're sensing how you're feeling. So it can have a benefit, if you're able to remain in that more deactivated state.
All right, thanks. Because that's the hardest part. Like
it is.
like one person stressed in the office can just change the whole vibe.
Totally. And, you know, Barbara, like, I think too, like, this is not something that suddenly you'll be easily able to do, but just that remembering, even if you just remember, feel my feet on the floor and feel my breath. I'm here, I'm open, I'm listening. So something like that, like it just, and we just remind ourselves gently, as someone's getting more and more activated, gently back to my own breathe, you know. So it's a practice for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I see Karen.
Okay, see, I just switched things because I couldn't find where it said I'm muted, but okay, it popped up. I don't know, it wasn't before.
Oh, I was able to unmute you. So yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good. How are you?
I'm
Thank you.
good.
Good. So just repeat again the DBT. I asked because I'm an LICSW for many years, geriatric LICSW, and I want to write wills, so I'm in law school now and make more money. But anyways, so I teach what you're doing, but the DBT. Tell me again. I missed the beginning. So I'm older. So it came out like after I went to grad school, and people say, "Have you specialized in this?" They're training. Tell me a little bit more because I think I do that anyhow. It's really hard to deal with stress, but it's like, is that like EMDR? Tell me a little bit more about what that is exactly. The DBT. It's just a regular.
Yeah. So DBT is a skills-based therapy. It has a manual. It's very specific. It has modules and specific skills. It's typically taught with a group and individual therapy. So it's usually a combination of attending a group and then going to an individual therapist. And it's very skills-based, teaching skills over time to help regulate emotions, to tolerate distressing situations, and how to communicate more effectively. So it's well researched and still utilized in many settings.
Is it a big training class, like of weeks that you just get a certificate and that? Yeah. So it's going through all those like coping.
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive, like so many different models. It's pretty comprehensive in terms of like acquiring the skills and getting supervision to get trained, but it's worth it. It's definitely a good model. And you can, and for those of you who are looking for a therapist, it's a nice model to see if that therapist has that background. That can be helpful as well. Yeah.
Okay. So can you recommend training places for that?
Well, send me, if you want to send me an email, Karen, I'm happy to do that. I'll put my,
what is your,
I'll put my email in the chat so anyone can reach out. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I don't see it yet. You're putting it in.
Yeah.
Our videos disabled too? No, because you can't tell how many people are in the class.
Oh, let's see let me see. Oh, I got it now. I got it. I think just
Tracy at lclma.org. Yes. You're an attorney too? No, LCLMA. You're a psychologist. Gotcha. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Any other questions?
The video thing's not on though. Is that? If that's the way you want it, right? Whoops.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Oops, now I totally goofed. I can't see you, but that's okay.
Okay.
I gotta run to class, but thank you so much for your.
You're welcome. Oh, John, yes. Okay.
Just nice to see you, Dr. Myers. Just a the court sanctioned proceedings of lawyers can be extremely stressful for a long period of times. For instance, if you're doing a trial for a week, okay, at high levels. So this is like taking, and I'm very active with mindfulness, but this is on steroids what you're dealing with here. Okay, the level of the stress. Someone's going to be incarcerated or not guilty. Someone's going to, lose a lot of money in a civil trial. Someone's going to be in a divorce proceeding and not have custody of their children. So this is very, very stressful work in general. Yeah. Okay, so I find this personally to be great and an enormous help for lawyers. But again, when you go into action, almost like a heart surgeon, it's significant action. Yeah. Okay, and so that's where this kind of help can be tremendous for us. So I'm just trying to analogize again the level of work we're doing, okay, and using this practice. Yeah. And again, thanks for everything because you're great at what you do.
Oh, thanks, John. Yeah, and I want to I echo and I appreciate that the emphasis on that crisis moment or the intensity, of being so high. I absolutely relate to that working in hospital settings and crisis settings where our adrenaline and our, all of our resources are being pulled. And then how do we still in those moments find some, mindfulness, some capacity? And it is really challenging. And, we just start with these practices. What I find is short practices, repeating them, giving ourselves grace when we lose it sometimes, which we may, right? But we can still come back and we do create new pathways over time, and even if you're the most calm person in the courtroom, that other people benefit from that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great question and response. I just wanted to add
Thank
to
you.
it is that we also had a recent webinar for busy lawyers last month on secondary trauma, because we know that a lot of lawyers do experience crisis, whether in their experience, in representing their clients, or they take on a lot of their clients' emotional burden. So if you would like to know more about secondary trauma as well, I encourage you to see the webinar for busy lawyers on our on-demand setting for that as well.
Any other questions? Oh, Clarissa, let's see. Here we go. Yes.
The last person's comments really resonated with me. And what's always helped me throughout my practice is to try to take time from time to time to think and study about how actors keep relaxed and control their nerves, stage fright, those kinds of things I learned in acting class. I still do exercises to try to get to sleep the night before. Because actors, though it's very different, deal with a very high level of stress day in and day out with their career. And also professional athletes. There's an older book out called The Corporate Athlete that talks about handling your professional life as a business person, much like a professional athlete does training, rest, recovery. So sometimes looking to other professions, I think, can be insightful and kind of a fun way to deal with anxiety and stress of the profession.
I love it. I love that acting. Yeah. I mean, this idea of using, some of the same techniques, the mind-body techniques, and that's often what we're talking about, right? That's why like the Somatic Resources crosses all of these different professions, because essentially when we're regulated, when we're able to access our physical calmness and keep our frontal lobes working well, we can do a variety of different tasks. So absolutely.
And I think some of it is maybe tapping into childhood. All these things you're talking about, at least I didn't learn as a child, right? That wasn't spoken about in middle school, high school, but a lot of people were in choir, or they were in marching band, or they were in sports. And I think sometimes as an adult, picking up those coping mechanisms is helpful, because the sort of mental muscle memory is there from ways that maybe were successful when you were a child, coping with anxiety and stress.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I totally relate to that with puzzles and playing instruments. Yeah, those are all. And we do need those true breaks to allow our system to come back into, the present moment as well.
Exactly. So yes, thanks for letting me share my ideas.
Yeah, I love them. Awesome ideas. Yeah. Yeah. That was, I think when we see how mindfulness is being used with Navy SEALs and with athletes, and you look at several professional sports now have a mindfulness coach, right? Like we can see how these resources are really being utilized for performance, for anxiety reduction, for stage fright, for talking in front of, thousands of people, or a judge, or
standing up to say your wedding vows, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, Clarissa, you're also saying something important about having fun too. Like, that idea about being playful, even in really stressful situations, that ability to laugh, the ability to feel camaraderie. That's also very much, I think, how we maybe felt if we were in a marching band or in a play. That kind of imagining the courtroom as this, place where these are all different players, right? And so finding that sense of common humanity, even if we have opposing views, is important.
Yes, well said.
All right. Oh, Karen, I think Karen has a question again. Yes, Karen.
No, quick question.
Sure.
I have family in Connecticut that could benefit from a really good psychologist. Are you individual practicing out in Connecticut?
No, so I'm just working through LCL.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll
Yeah.
email you. Maybe you can, someone could, but all right, thank you.
Yeah, email me if you've got any questions about resources, and
Okay.
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Sure. All right.
I wanted to note too, Tracy, you went through so many of these wonderful resources for us. I know that people often will want to revisit these webinars. You will be receiving the recording and the slides by tomorrow. So if you would like to go through and pause for a moment at the different concepts that Tracy talked about, whether it's creating a safe container for your worry boxes, the palms up, palms down, the using the senses to ground yourself in reality, those are all things that you can do by rewatching the recording or seeing the slides and pausing and then walking yourself through it as well. Certainly encourage you to do that. We included a link also for, as I mentioned, Tracy does the yoga for busy lawyers. She's a fabulous teacher in everything she does. So I certainly encourage all of you to do that too. I also just wanted to note she went through a lot of terrific resources today on the slides. With a variety of somatic resources, emotional regulation, and self-compassion. And I wanted to note that Rachel, who runs our website, does a fabulous job at collecting all of the content on a website. So if you go to lclma.org and if you look for category tags, whether it's self-care, self-compassion, mindfulness and meditation, well-being, you will also find a wealth of other resources if you want to walk yourself through it bit by bit. But I think it's really helpful to have this incorporated into your practice. And sometimes we think, oh, I want to do that, and then we don't make time for it. But if you do a little bit of this day by day or week by week, you can really incorporate it into your life. So just wanted to let you be aware of all those resources.
I love that. Thanks, Laura, for reminding us about the little by little day. I mean, that really is how change happens, but it can feel sometimes like, oh, it doesn't really make a difference, etc. But it really does. So, all right. Well, I appreciate everyone here, and please feel free. You've got my email, so feel free to reach out, and look forward to hearing from you and seeing you all in the future. And thank you so much for supporting this program.
Thank you. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you again. Wait,
I want to thank.
Yeah, again. Sorry.
I want to thank all of you for being here, for your time and being with us today. I want to thank Dr. Tracy for her excellent presentation. I just wanted to note as well, our next webinar for busy lawyers will be on client portals. We're still figuring out a specific Wednesday in September, but certainly watch the page to learn for that. And also where we were talking about reaching out for help or support today, in addition to the resources you mentioned, so this is one of the programs that LCL does, but remember that we also have free consultations. So whether you're looking for help with practice management or with clinical help, certainly we encourage you to reach out and schedule a consultation with us as well. So we just encourage you all to take care of yourselves. And thank you so much. Tracy, I'll turn it to you for closing thoughts before we depart.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Yeah, so think maybe today about one of those resources, just giving yourself 2 minutes of a practice, whether it's just a little breathing, whether the senses, but just kind of see, how does this affect me? And notice, if being in the present moment or bringing self-compassion can impact your mood, your state of mind in that moment. A lot of grace. We need a lot of grace and a lot of practice. So don't feel bad if it doesn't, make a difference right away, just a little bit at a time, like Laura was saying. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.
Very nice meeting you. Bye-bye.
Nice meeting you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.